Sawadee Kap, Jack Pratatai. Hi from Thailand, everybody. Katot, Pomput Pasatai Mai Dai Pa, Put Giogap, Banha, Ganuang Tisab Song. Uh, I don't speak Thai good enough to uh, speak in Thai about complicated political issues. But if any Thais who understand English want to work with me to do a Thai translation of this video, let's do it. Um, I'm going to talk about an issue that's been um, in the news in Thailand that I haven't seen um, hit the Western press yet, at least not on my feed so far. I'm sure it'll hit really soon though. Um, and that's about Paul Chambers. Short summary, and I'm going to explain this in a lot of detail, but if Thailand locks that prick up and throws away the key, then he deserves it. Um, Here's what happened. He got busted for violating Article 112, which is Thailand's lèse majesté law. That's basically don't talk any shit about the royals. I think it only specifically applies to king, queen, past kings, and regents. Um, and some might even say it's not really a lèse majesté law, it's just um, anti-defamation law in Thailand is pretty strict on those, which they are. Thailand does have some pretty strict anti-defamation laws, but to stretch it to the point of saying it's not a lèse majesté law is probably going a little too far. But nonetheless, the law is greatly misunderstood by most Farang. It's Thai for gringo. Um, for those of you who aren't familiar with certain Thai words. Um, but there is there is that law, but and yeah, the guy got busted for it. Who was actually an American and a lawyer, um, and he's in jail awaiting trial. And I'm going to say good for Thailand on this. See, the West, U.S. in particular, is particularly nasty about this. Um, Preaching a set of values that not only does it not live up to, but loves to use as a bludgeon against any nation, particularly global South nation, that will not kowtow to its agenda. And this is the case with freedom of speech. If anybody thinks that the U.S. actually has freedom of speech, take a look into the case of Amal Yeshitela and his recent trial, or take a look at how many protesters have been arrested for criticizing the U.S.'s funding of Israel and their genocidal massacre of the people of Palestine. Now, here's what you got to understand. When you look at a law, got to look in two ways. The first is, what's the actual law say? And you can find English translations online of Article 112, and it's maybe a line and a half that basically, says don't criticize the king, the queen, the former kings, the regent, etc. Pretty straightforward. And it would be very easy and understandable at that point for your average Westerner, especially your average American who loves to say, yeehaw, we have free speech, America, fuck yeah, and all that, um, you'd think that this is just some backward, archaic kind of law. And even those who um, tell you to respect another country's laws are still coming from a very kind of arrogant point of view, not really understanding the law very well, thinking, well, Thailand has the right to be backward. And that's not really what's going on, though. You have to actually, to understand the law, not just read what the law says on the books, but take a look at how it actually gets implemented. And when you look at how the law actually gets implemented, a much different picture emerges. It's not really about some reverence for royalty, although there is definitely the facade of that, and to the point that I'd say even um, some Thai people would call it that. But if you actually look at what's happening, it's not that. It's a national security law. It's the Thai government's ace in the hole against foreign agents and domestic sellouts. Now, granted, there's a lot of foreign agents here. I've had my run-ins with them, um, most of whom fly under the radar. There's only so many people Thailand can bust for this. Um, but this guy got busted, and he deserved it. Now, cases of violations of 112 are fairly rare. 2020 set a record for most people charged with a 112 violation. It was around 50 some, and this was during a wave of protests. Now, granted, these protests were slush funded by the NED and other Western money, but that's a whole other story. But say there were about 50 some people brought up on charges of 112, and of course, a lot of Western media outlets were like, "Oh, this is a draconian law where Thailand doesn't have free speech." Where, okay, but you actually take a look at what happened. That wasn't really the case. Yes, about 50 some people were brought up on on charges of violating Article 112. Only a handful of them were arrested. I think maybe like 3, 4, or 5 were actually arrested. Most of them were served, a summons, a court summons saying, "Come to court. You're being charged." Okay, and were never arrested for it. And when people were actually, when you actually look at what people were actually convicted of, and now of those 50 some people, yes, a majority were found guilty. But the vast majority of those who were found guilty were not given any sentence. It's like the judge basically said, "You're found guilty of violating Article 112. Bangs gavel. Go on, get out of here." Okay, that's what happened. Now, there were some people who were given harsh sentences, and some may have deserved it and some may not. Every country has some judges or other forms of law enforcers who get into it for power trippy purposes, who probably should never be in there in the first place. Just the way, like, we've all pretty much anywhere in the world where we've been to school, we've had some teachers who should never have been teachers because they got into it to push kids around to flex their power around kids. You're just kind of got through rewatching some of the Harry Potter movies. Every one of us has had a Dolores Umbridge type teacher. Likewise, everywhere has some. Um, I'm not going to go to police, and although that's true, um, in the country like the U.S. and other imperialist countries, all cops are bad. Not the case here in more chill country like Thailand, but certainly when it comes to something like judges, there are definitely people who shouldn't be judges and just enjoy being punitive assholes, and that may have been the case with some of these, and tragedies have occurred. People got unfair sentences. But that also happens everywhere, and that's a problem for every country to root out. It's not a problem with the law in and of itself for a judge to be a punitive prick. What so here you had people convicted, and mostly were protesters, and you know the judges for the cases realized these are young folks blowing off steam. There was even a case. Oh God, this was back sometime I've read about. I want to say maybe early 2000s. I could be off. It was back when Rama IX was still alive and on the throne, and some European reporter got drunk and ended up vandalizing one of the public pictures of Rama IX, and he got arrested. They were throwing the book at him. I think they were like saying they're going to give him 75 years, but if he confessed, they'll only give him 15. Blah blah blah. And after they found him guilty, Rama IX himself pardoned the guy. It was very obvious he realized this wasn't a guy threatening Thai sovereignty. This was just a guy who got drunk and did something stupid. Granted, subtext, don't do it again, but he realized it wasn't really attacking individual, enemy needed to be worried about. So that's how and so you can't be looking at a law as draconian when the majority of people who um, who get brought up on charges are merely served a court summons, not arrested, and many who are convicted don't actually get any real sentence. That's not draconian. It becomes very clear that they're using this law to weed out threats to their sovereignty. One particular Thai politician who's quite the U.S. sellout, and he's kind of Thailand's Donald Trump. His name's Thanathorn Juangroongruangkit. He's the heir to Thailand's largest manufacturer of auto parts, and he actually was like the main challenging candidate to Prayut back in 2019. And it was going up against an administration that had over some time, and there were some squabbles and things, but basically worked out a Belt and Road Initiative deal with China. With high-speed rail, eventually the plan is not just with Thailand, but from lines to go from Kunming in southern China all the way down to Singapore. It's currently under construction, and this guy basically got it. Tried to oppose the project without saying he was opposing the project. Basically, what he did is he said, well, we shouldn't be working, we shouldn't be having a Chinese company build it, despite the fact that, talking about how it's not going to be good enough and all that typical, Western sounding kind of BS, automatically hating on China. sort of thing and went to Hyperloop, an American company, American high-speed rail company supposedly, but that has never actually built any publicly functioning tracks. And if you didn't know it already, Hyperloop is owned by Elon Musk. So yeah, so basically, and here's this guy who wants to supposedly, you know, switch out the Thai part of this high-speed rail line from Chinese to American, and what's that really gonna do? I mean, it's still a track, that eventually is supposed to run from Kunming all the way to Singapore. Um, what? How really is it going to change if you um, switch the part in Thailand from a Chinese company to an American company? It's still the same track, so why even do that? It was really clear that this guy's the heir to Thailand's largest auto parts manufacturer. It's pretty clear that he wants to scuttle the project because he doesn't want to convert the business to manufacturing perhaps replacement parts for trains. He wants to keep his, and he'll still get plenty of money even with the high speed rail line um, in auto parts, but he's being greedy. And they've been trying to bring a 112 charge on this guy for about 5 years, but they're and because this guy has a lot of celebrity, the courts are proceeding very, very slowly and diligently on this. Um, so again, this is someone who basically was trying to sell the country out for his, for for his own personal gain. Typical. And Thailand has its share of Trump-like politicians, moguls who got into politics. He's not the only one. Um, but this is a good example of where big business is not good government, and is usually getting in there just for their own greed. Um, so this is one case where you can clearly see that a lot of the Thai courts are using 112 as a national security thing, in this case targeting a domestic sub. Now, this Dick Paul Chambers did get arrested, so they probably had something to nail him on. And like I said, good for them, because this guy, people think, oh, he's just expressing his opinion. Well, no, he's not. No, he's not. Okay, what he's doing is he's coming here and promoting an agenda that is wanting Thailand to kowtow to the U.S. Americans need to lose their fucking ego and realize they ain't no better than anybody else, and they don't have the right to tell the rest of the world what to do, and their so-called democracy is a fucking sham. Okay? It is not democracy ruled by the people to have an election where you gotta spend private money to finance a campaign. Who benefits from that? The rich. And that happens in America. And the reason why America promotes quote unquote democracy around the world it's got nothing to do with human rights. It's complete fucking bullshit that's all about money. It's because they want other countries to have that same system so that they can sponsor their puppet candidates. That's all it's about. And if you're an American waving a flag thinking you're better because your country is democratic, you're full of shit. You're just an arrogant lady. That's all you are. Okay? Get over it. Get over it. Okay? You're an arrogant piece of shit. If you actually think the U.S. gives a damn about democracy, they don't. And you can't look at this and not be seriously skeptical on the timing. This guy, comes to Thailand and starts talking shit about the Thai government, using the typical Western bludgeoning shit about how they don't have democracy. Wah, wah, wah. Okay. And gets arrested just days after Dump does his, made up tariff bullshit. Okay. It reminds me of when Dump first got elected back in 2016 when he took office. 2017, there were these posts going around social media, saying something to the equivalent of, hey, racists, don't think that just because Donald Trump spouts off racism, you can get away with it too. He has the Secret Service to protect him, and you don't. Okay, and that's kind of what happened here. Trump bullied Thailand, and yes, Paetongtarn Shinawatra, she's a puppet. He bullied her into just these absolute nuts trade deals. But he did it from the safety of the White House. He didn't come to Thailand to do it. This guy was stupid enough to come to Thailand, probably at the behest of forces in the U.S., to try and get Thailand to opt out of their agenda. He didn't have that safety, and Thailand has locked him up. Good for Thailand. So, it's not, it's a clear um, attempt, given, I don't know, granted, I'm not um, I don't have any um, knowledge of someone actually, in the U.S. government or some hotshot mogul or whatever, ordering this guy to come to Thailand and do it and all that crap. But you got to be scratching your head about the timing. And if you're dismissing it, it's just coincidence, then nah, I don't think so. Okay. Now, the current Prime Minister, Paetongtarn Shinawatra, nicknamed Ung Ying, she's the daughter of a former prime minister who was couped by the Thai military. And there was a lot of various corruption stuff leading up to his ouster, but it happened when he was in New York City. And if you read articles about it, they'll tell you that he was visiting the UN on the day of the coup. And that's true, but what they usually don't tell you is where he was the day before. Yeah, he was also in New York the day before, and he was meeting with the Council on Foreign Relations. And if you know what the Council on Foreign Relations is, for those of you who don't, I'll tell you, it's an organization that's been around for over 100 years. It's basically Wall Street's main think tank on how to exploit the global South. So any leader of another country, especially a global South country, going and visiting them is committing an act bordering on treason. And like I said, there was a lot leading up to the ouster of Thaksin Shinawatra, but that might have been the straw that broke the camel's back. It's clearly indicating that he was selling out to the Western financial elites. And interestingly enough, see, I found this stuff out not through someone trying to spill the tea on Thaksin, but having friends who were Thaksin supporters posting up these articles actually where he'd continue to, from his exile in Dubai, travel to New York and give speeches at the CFR. Okay, so, and of course, Thai friends of mine who supported the guy, not knowing what the Council on Foreign Relations was, were posting this like, oh, look, he's speaking at this, big international organization, not what it was. And I took a look at that and I'm like, oh, okay, this guy's a puppet. It was obvious. So yeah, so and granted, um, I didn't have the greatest parental upbringing, you might say. For those of you who know me, I certainly don't want to judge anyone solely by their parents. I mean, we don't get to choose that. But in the case of Patangtan Shinawat, I don't think the apple falls too far from the tree here. You know, and if you're wondering just how bad this trade deal was, one thing, I mean, you're hearing things about buying American aircraft and that sort of thing, but they're also, and here's where it gets just absolutely um, nuts, is that an agreement to buy American pork. I know the irony of the term pork fat, you know, in terms of legislation, but no, I'm talking about literal pork here. And for anyone who's been to Thailand, you know that the quality of pork here is a whole lot better than it is in the US. Now, I'm not sure why that's the case. I honestly do not know um, what the difference is between American pig farms and Thai pig farms that makes for better quality pork here, but it's a lot better here. And um, you know, when you then add in the fact that this has got to cross the ocean via boat to get here, the pork that comes in is going to be absolute shit. You know, and even I mean, um, in most other countries, you know, PMs appoint their own cabinet. The agricultural ministers, you know, who probably would have been appointed by PM Ling, is even calling her out like, why are you betraying our farmers like this? Um, so even from her own party, it looks like she's getting some opposition here for kowtowing to dump so badly on this. Fortunately, there are the countries that are standing up to dump. Um, the Malaysian Prime Minister has even called on ASEAN to unite against it, to unite against dumps, tariff bullying. And for those of you that haven't already figured out, the numbers that he made up on the numbers on that chart about tariffs were completely pulled out of his ass. That's a whole other story. I'm not going to get into the um, craziness of dumps tariffs in this video. It's all other stuff, and there's already plenty of decent info out there. But um, in terms of Thailand's free speech, yeah, okay, yes, Thailand has strict anti-defamation laws that even have lèse majesté component, but you know, just about everywhere else, um, Thailand it has very lax free speech to the point when I was actually teaching, there were Facebook ads. You know, when I was teaching English here, there were Facebook ads floating around. I saw my students sharing them, not really quite getting what they were, I think, or at least not understanding the imperialist implications. But there were actually ads in Thai on Facebook for the French Foreign Legion. America wouldn't put up with that, you know, and rightly so. I'm frankly surprised that the Thai government did, but it's certainly, good evidence that you can say a lot of stuff here quite freely. Um, so these, these accusations that Thailand doesn't have free speech are basically just Western horse shit, wanting to it's racism. Oh, we the West are civilized and everybody else isn't, and they should all be like us. It's that arrogant bullshit, and that's all it is. Um, and governments aren't perfect. Okay, no government is, But, and I think um, Thai people of all political persuasions have their issues with the government, just as you see in any nation. Okay, they're not perfect. Um, they deal with all the same kinds of issues that any other government deals with. But Thailand doesn't go around pushing its way on other countries the way countries like the U.S. and the U.K. do. Okay, you know, I'm Muslim and therefore, granted, part of what many would consider a heretical sect, but I'm Muslim, and so we um, value, obeying the law of the land, provided it doesn't get to the point of being too inhumane. And Thailand's not come anywhere close to crossing that line. Um, now I'm also I'm communist, and many would think that, okay, why are you as a communist defending a monarchy? Well, it's a complicated answer. Now, if you look at European monarchies, yeah, they're right wing shit. They are. They're just greedy colonizer bastards. You might get a little bit of exceptions with like some of the Scandinavian countries that um, benefited off colonialism, but weren't really the colonizers themselves, kind of thing. But I mean, I know someone here in one of my classes, someone who had been in one of my classes who was Danish. Um, she actually had some pretty decent things to say about the Danish monarchy. Um, but the thing is, like, as much as on the surface, especially if you look at European royalty and its um, quite, quite just a, old word, oligarchical kind of crap. Um, what leftist policies have um, greatly benefited Thailand the most have come out of the royals. I know that sounds kind of contradictory, okay, but it is. Rama IX, the previous king, was one of the most beloved world leaders of the 20th century anywhere in the world. And it was because he basically gave all Thais who didn't have one a house and farmland. Um, Now, does that mean that there, there from that point on wasn't exploitation of Thai capitalists, of Thai workers? Yeah, there still continue to be, but giving your citizenry a basic house and farmland to start from makes, at least raises the standard of living for the country, making the exploitation a little, by the capitalists of the working class a little less. So, um, it's about as leftist move as you get. It's actually very similar to the land reform acts that Ho Chi Minh implemented like 20 or 30 years earlier. Not to mention that as communists, we are about national sovereignty. We're against colonialism, and it was the Thai monarchy um, that really kind of has kept Thailand independent. Thailand was the one Southeast Asian nation that was not colonized by a European power. Okay, and it was mainly um, the real visionary on that one was King Mongkut Rama IV. That's the one you see in The King and I. Granted, that's kind of a bad movie that ended in Thailand, and it doesn't really do the guy justice. The remake with Jodie Foster and Chai and Fat's a little better. um, but but because it is an issue, they are very sensitive of portrayal of the royals here, so it's pretty much just not done. Um, just in case. but he was really kind of the visionary. What's often the like remake around 2000 does a little better job of touching on it. But he was the one who saw, because he had been, before he took the throne, he had been a monk for many years. So he worked, he talked with, he was a Buddhist monk, was talking with a lot of Christian monks. And back at that point, a lot of clergy were also scientists. And he was a scientist himself. He actually, um, when many of the other monk scientists were predicting a solar eclipse, he looked at it and said, "No, your math's wrong, and no, it's going to happen this time." And he was right. So he was, in the King and I, they just portray him as just some kind of, you know, glossy-eyed admirer of Western science, which isn't really true. He was, in fact, a scientist himself. Um, and his son Rama V, Chulalongkorn, was the one who basically took his vision, um, and kept Thailand free from colonization. So it was actually the Thai monarchy who who kept Thailand free. Um, so when we think of royalty by a Western lens, it doesn't always apply here. That might seem a little contradictory, it might seem a little odd, but it is what it is, and give them the credit, for what for what they've done. Um, I know there's a lot of young Thais who get suckered in to kind of a Western agenda and really a glossy-eyed admiration for American democracy, not realizing what a sham it is. And many of them will want to get rid of Law 112, get rid of Article 112, and I'd say to them, well, I get that it's, not a perfect thing and all, but what are you going to do? What would you do if you got rid of that law? What would you do to replace it? What would you use as your replacement for Thailand's ace in the hole against the onslaught of Western neocolonization? What law would you put in place to replace it? And I suppose one's as good as another, but well, this one's working. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Ideally, we would live in a world where we wouldn't need that sort of thing, but we do live in that world, and Thailand needs to protect its sovereignty. So, if that's what Thailand's got to do, okay. Let's go not to a direct neighbor that doesn't border, but let's go either through Laos or Cambodia to Vietnam. Vietnam has some very strict laws against criticism of the government. Now, that's not to say that the Vietnamese are apolitical. If anything, Vietnamese are not shy, and I've been there 4 times. They're not shy at all about talking politics, and they're actually quite politically educated. But, basically, open, organized criticism of the government's a big no-no. And that might seem very harsh and very backward, but well, think about it. Vietnam had to fight wars against both France and America to maintain their sovereignty, to not end up being a colony or a neo-colony. What do you expect them to do? You expect them to just say, oh yeah, we're going to allow any free speech, and that would then in turn invite the US, the UK, France, Western Europe, with all their money that they've gotten off of colonial plunder, to then slush fund political opposition to the Vietnamese government who wants to keep Vietnam free and independent. What the hell do you expect them to do? Then it's something that is a necessity for them to maintain their independence. It's this. Well, Thailand doesn't go to quite that length. They got to do something. As someone from the US, when you are from an imperialist nation like the US, and it would apply to the UK, too, it would apply to France, there is no healthy nationalism because the national identity is tied up in imperialism, is tied up in arrogantly going around and thinking that you're better and you can impose your will on somebody else. But most other countries aren't like that. Most other countries don't go around doing that. Thailand doesn't go around doing that. So there's a healthy Thailand. So nationalism anywhere can um, get distorted into all kinds of nasty bigotry and stuff. But there is a healthy nationalism in countries like Thailand that's saying, "Hey, we'll be friendly to anybody, but let us be ourselves. Let us be Thailand." And if you got jail some American imperialists who come here trying to get Thailand to kowtow to a Western agenda, then yeah, those people deserve to be locked up. And Paul Chambers deserves to be locked up.